Good morning. This is Crystal Woods with Seasons in the Vine, and it's Fresh Friday. And today I'm taking us off of the Esther program, the Esther course, just to bring to you a Fresh Friday where I am just planning on depositing a spiritual wisdom, a biblical principle into your lap. So this is all application. This is right from my own home. And so the title of this video is An Introduction to My Plants. And the main point in that is I actually have a lot of plants. I'll get into that story, but the main reason for that is that the Lord has been teaching me about himself and the way the kingdom works and the way bearing fruit works and planting works and soil works through actual plants. Go figure. Jesus's parables were often agricultural in nature first because that made sense to the people at the time. But those applications, those images, those illustrations are still completely valid today because the reality is we all need food. We all look outside and into nature and we see things growing constantly. We see when storms come, the destruction that they bring. We see when there's too much water or too little water in a drought. We see when there is too much fertilizer or too little fertilizer, what actually happens. And so those parables still work excuse me, even today. So how did I get into plants? Well, I'm definitely not a green thumb. I have never had a garden that I was successful at. It takes a lot of maintenance and diligence. And in general, I have very strong discipline patterns, but they don't tend to be with plants. So it's been the first thing off the list. But that's really been a change for me in the newer season of my life. I'll tell you how it happened. So, my oldest daughter had a lot of plants in her room, but she moved away 2 years ago. And so when she left, she gave some of the trickier plants to people that actually were able to keep them alive, like my mom and my friend Jen Pyle and her daughter Juliana. And so they took those, but then there was a few left and one of them is actually here today. I'm going to introduce this little guy to you and tell you his story. But they were left to me, and I've done okay with keeping them alive. But I'll share a little bit about the one that she left that I want to bring to your attention today. So what happened was I started taking care of some plants, and then we redid some parts of the house, and I wanted to have live vegetation in the home. I wanted to have the green and life. I wanted to speak life. I wanted to prophesy life. I wanted to have life cultivated and grown in our home. And so I went into this adventure of collecting plants. So typical me style, like my wiring, I'm very intense and I'm really hardcore. And so I went hard after it and ended up with about 44 plants. All different sizes, some small, so don't think it's a jungle over here, but it is a lot of plants. I actually have a whole wall in the big family room area that is just plants that are big and they're growing and I love it. And so each room has a sprinkling of vegetation, if you will. And some have been challenging. Some have really died. I've not been great at figuring out what they needed. But the Father is the vine dresser. He knows exactly what we need. And so a lot of this message is about you talking to the Lord about what season you're in, where you're planted, what this is going to look like. So let me get to it. Some of the analogies I'm going to share today. I have become a plant mom. I joke and I say one of my kids moved away and I became a plant mom of 44. So what I'm doing with all the extra, right? And but what the Lord has done very specifically is shown me some things. So I'm actually going to start with the hibiscus. I'm going to bring it over. Okay, so this guy, he's been around for a while. He's a tiny hibiscus, and that's okay. We receive him for where he's at, and isn't that the way the Lord does? So I'm going to speak to you today, but I know the Holy Spirit is going to be making things clear. So this friend was purchased a couple of years ago with 2 companion friends, and for a time they grew in the same pot. Then they needed a bigger pot. And so put some new soil in, but the other two were not thriving. And this one was really, the other two were really kind of becoming rather dead and like stickish, like they weren't going to make it. But this one had some hope. It had just this one part here that still had some leaves. And so I'm looking at it, and I'm like, you know what? I think he needs more space. He needs more soil, and the other ones are not viable. So I pulled them out and removed them from this pot. Well, within a week, there was new growth. It was an immediate response. There was immediate fruit and benefit from being taken out of an environment where its nutrients were being taken, where it didn't have enough space. And then take a look here. This is all brand new. Super exciting, tiny little, and they're already getting kind of big. They were so tiny when we first started. So all of that has happened within the last 2 months of removing the other two plants from this spot. So just ponder that. What does that look like? Okay, the other one I'm going to show you is very similar case. Now this one is a really cool tree looking thing that I have in a big like trough, wooden trough kind of thing on my table as a centerpiece. And so inside I have 4 plants, and this is one of them. And this guy was really tiny when I first got him, cheap too. Like I was just like, it was like a $5 plant. But he came also with a couple of friends, and all together they were chilling out, happy as can be. But then all of a sudden, the other two weren't doing so hot, and this one started to not do so hot. And I thought, well, maybe it's like the hibiscus, and maybe it's too crowded and there's too much going on right here, and this guy is not getting what he needs with who he's surrounded with. That would be an application. Who are you surrounded with? Who has influence? Who has effect over you? And is it something where they're pouring in or they're sucking out? Or is this plant becoming anemic because there's so much being taken from it that it's not even getting the right amount of nutrients from the soil or from the water? So as soon as those other two were moved out of this little place, this guy jumped up at least 3 inches, and it's only been under a month, and he's going to make it, and he's thriving. And so we have new leaf growth here, lots of new leaves like inside here, and more height. And it all came from actually having things removed that were taking the life from it. Okay. All right, now the last one, so exciting, totally different scenario. And the reason I'm telling you about my plants and introducing you to my plants, because the Lord still speaks through his creation. He still speaks through his nature, and it speaks to our hearts and how we're to be cultivated and how he wants to grow us, and how truly there's a season for everything. There is even a season to have a lot of overlap, a lot of things in the pot, and then a season where it's not to be like that, and it's more of a solo journey. Not that you're not plugged in and planted. I'm a big fan of being in a local church, being planted, being known, having good, solid friends, all of that. But like, to what overlap is this to be occurring? What is that to look like? So not taking off, like leaving the assembly, that's in the Bible, you just do it. I'm talking about all the other things. Are you surrounded day in and day out by things that are draining you? By being potted in a place where you're not able to get what you need and what the Lord wants you to have. There is a season for everything, and it's okay to go into a season of quiet. It's okay to go into a season of hiddenness and to just be with the Lord and let him go deep and get those roots, down into that soil even more, and let him prune and bear that fruit. Okay, so last plant is a corn plant. And I don't know the name of the other one, the one in the middle I just did, and it doesn't really matter. But I do know the corn plant. Okay, so this is one of Shelby's plants that she left me. So when I got him, he was probably really tiny. He was just a little guy, and I'll bring him over in a second. He was in his normal old pot. We had put new soil in it though, and but he just was always falling over. I mean, I would come out every day and say, like, why do you keep falling over? What is your problem? What is happening? Why can't you stand up? Okay, so good. So I'm just pondering, like, when I look at my plants and I'm seeking the Lord on, like, how do we work like this? And how are you showing us principles from your word, those agricultural parables that explain what's happening and where to bear fruit? Like, we're in the vine to bear fruit. You get what I'm saying. So this guy kept falling over. Shelby was in town in September, and I was telling her, like, he just doesn't ever want to stand up. He always wants to fall over. And she's looking at it and she's like, I don't really know. Let's give him some support though. And because it looked like he had plenty of space in the pot. Like, he wasn't very big. And so we put him a little crutch in there. We put a little pole and we tied some rope around it, and he stood up. But lo and behold, over about 6 weeks, even that was getting ripped out and he was just falling over on his side. I was getting really frustrated because I thought, like, you're not dead, but like, you're also not thriving. You're not dead, but you're not thriving. Now that's a word. You're not dead, but are you thriving where you're planted? Are you thriving in what this season is supposed to be? Are you thriving with what you're surrounded with and where you're planted? Okay, so let me show you this guy now. Well, no, let me get to the best part. So I'm walking by him and I'm just struck by this godly inspiration. I truly think it is, because I have all these conversations with the Lord. And instantly in my mind, what came to pass was, he wants to be a tree. Like, he wants to be big, and he can't do that in this soil. Like, there's not enough stability. It's not a deep enough pot to hold him, so he gets top heavy. And he keeps falling over because he can't spread out. So he's limited in how much he can grow, how big he can be, how much he can bear fruit, because his roots aren't able to expand. Do you see where I'm going here? It was a moment. And I looked at my family and I was like, I think he wants to be a tree. And I'm not giving him the space, the pot, the soil, the depth of the soil to be a tree. But he doesn't want to be a plant. He doesn't want to be a small house plant. He wants to be a tall tree, and corn plants can get really, 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 really tall. So he wants to be a tree. And so something has to change. Okay, so super small, like maybe this big. All right, now I'm going to bring him over. It's been 2 months since I heard that he wanted to be a tree, and I put him in a big pot. Okay, I'm going to show you. So he was in a pot, about that big, like your typical 6-inch pot. And he was just over the top of it, but always falling over. Now he's in this baby, nice and tall. And look how huge he is now. Look at that. And you know what's super exciting? Look in here, we have new leaves coming out, new growth. And look how big he is. He's over 1 foot tall. And he is a tree. So what are you supposed to be? What has God spoken over your life? What is your call? What is your anointing? And are you planted in a place where you can really spread out? And I'm going to give some accolades to my church, Zeal Church York, because when I went there, I was beginning to understand spiritual gifts and authority. And I've always been a Bible teacher and went to seminary and did all of that. But like, there were other parts of my walk with the Lord that I was like, I understand the Bible, but am I living the Bible? Am I operating out of the Bible and like what we see there? Like, is my theology practical for real everyday life? And what Zeal did was it gave me a bigger pot. It gave me a space to practice under the beautiful covering of the church and the protection there and the authority structure there, but it gave me space to grow. And I operate in the Spirit and I operate in ministry completely different than I did 3 years ago when I started there, because I got a pot that was big enough. Are you being stifled where you are? I'm not. I have so much freedom and liberty. And also with that, I'm very, very responsible. I never want to abuse the Holy Spirit or misrepresent him. I take that seriously, and I'm always backing things up with the word. So it's reciprocated. I'm not just flying. I don't believe we ever go rogue. I think authority must always be over us. And ultimately Christ is that authority. But even in our church structures or in our ministries or at our jobs, like maybe this is a career thing for you. And you're like, I was made for something different. But I'm not planted where I can grow. And what do I need to do differently? Where do I need to expand? Where do I need to risk? Where do I need to go with this? And so my soil, the pot, the depth of the soil for this corn plant was too shallow to let it be the tree that it was designed to be. This is a design thing. Like, they can be huge. So he just kept falling over. So is that you today? Is there a planting where you're at where it's not, you're being suffocated, you're being stifled? There isn't a place for depth and growth and risk, because living unto the Lord a spirit-filled life is all about risk. But can you do that with a safety net around you and the support and encouragement? I'm so blessed that I have that at my church, and I've been able to grow and expound and safely venture into things completely covered by other believers who are testing and discerning at the same time and holding everything up to the Bible. Okay, so that's how this has really spoken to me. Are you planted where you can actually be what God has designed you to be, what your wiring is, what your DNA is? Soil is important. Do you need more nutrients where you're at right now? What is taking your nutrients away? Are you surrounded by things that are actually stifling your growth and suffocating you? And what needs to change? Seek the Lord for that. What needs to be different? It might not be a change of job, but it might be I need to be involved in a ministry or involved with a group of people that pour into me, that uplift me, because I'm doing so much pouring out. Who you're planted next to affects you. It affected this little guy. He was planted next to some cool dudes. They were awesome, and they were all the same, but they couldn't all be together. Not all the time. They started there, but the gospel always goes forth in this exponential way. So things change. There's seasons for that togetherness, and there's seasons for that expansion and that separateness. So are you outgrowing your space? Like the corn plant, are you outgrowing your space? Where does God want to move you, to grow you? And you might immediately be filled with anxiety because you hate risk. You hate leaving what you know, what is safe, but you are the fallen corn plant. You'll never be what he designed you to be if you do not get out of the place of comfortability, the place where it's just as much as it is, and that's all that it will ever be. You need a place where you can really grow, and that's risky and challenging, and it causes some anxiety and panic possibly in some of you, but it's the only way, because the gospel is always having to go forth, and that's always risky. It's always risky. So where do you need to be planted so that you can bear the best fruit for his glory? And is that where you're at now? And does anything else need to change? How's your soil? Where are your nutrients at? And when you're planted, where are those spiritual disciplines? The word, worship, prayer, community with people. Where is that? And are you able to expand where you are? Okay, and grow. So those are my tangible biblical principles, godly wisdom, spiritual wisdom, insight poured out on you today. Take what you want, see what the Lord confirms for your own life, and think about your plants a little bit differently if you have them. What are they showing you that is actually a principle that we can even observe in how God tends to us and what he has for us? Much love.